He called her unsophisticated at dinner parties. He bought another woman roses with a credit card his wife didn't know she owned. He built an empire and never once looked down to see whose hands were holding the foundation. Welcome back, my wonderful family and friends. I am Mr. Zaha. Thanks for tuning in today. A kind words from a man who has seen it all. Marriage are not mostly bed of roses. Sometime you need more of. More of what? Can't say. Continue watching and you will surely know what to do in situations like this. Kindly hit that subscribe button and drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Tomorrow, I'll be bringing you another exciting story you definitely don't want to miss. So let's get started. Lauren and Mercer, née Calloway, had grown up in Rockford, Illinois, in a house where money was discussed only when there wasn't enough of it, which was often enough that she had learned early the difference between the appearance of security and the real thing. Her father, Thomas Calloway, had been an accountant, not the glamorous kind, not the kind with a downtown firm and a corner office, but the kind who worked out of a converted spare bedroom and did taxes for small business owners and retirees, and the occasional farmer who didn't trust computers. He was meticulous and patient and almost completely uninterested in wealth as a concept, which was a quality Lauren had absorbed so deeply it had become structural, part of the architecture of how she moved through the world. Her mother, Diane, had taught middle school mathematics for 31 years and had the specific, unshakable calm of a person who has explained the same concept to confused 12-year-olds for 3 decades and emerged convinced that most problems, properly broken down, are solvable. Lauren had gotten her father's precision and her mother's patience and combined them into something neither of them had quite predicted, a mind for money that was not about accumulation but about understanding, about seeing beneath the surface of financial structures to the load-bearing elements underneath, the way an engineer sees a bridge not as an aesthetic object but as a system of forces. She had gone to the University of Illinois on a merit scholarship, studied finance, graduated third in her class, and gone to work at a mid-sized investment firm in Chicago called Meridian Capital Partners at 22 years old, where she had spent the next 9 years becoming very quietly, very deliberately good at identifying undervalued opportunities and knowing exactly when to move. She had met Blake Mercer at a friend's birthday party when she was 27. He had been the most energetic person in the room, tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of confidence that fills a space without asking permission, the kind that made people lean toward him at parties without quite knowing why. He sold commercial software solutions for a living and had plans, he told her within 20 minutes of meeting her, to start his own company. What kind of company? She'd asked. The kind that changes how businesses manage their supply chain data, he said. The market is completely underserved. I've been studying it for 2 years. What's your customer acquisition model? She asked. He had looked at her, really looked at her, recalibrating, and laughed. Most people just ask what the product does. The product doesn't matter if you can't get it to the people who need it, she said. He had asked for her number before the night was over. They had dated for 14 months and married in a small ceremony in Rockford, her parents' church, 60 guests, a reception in the hall next door with a buffet that Diane Calloway had largely organized herself. Blake's parents, Richard and Suzanne Mercer of Winnetka, had attended with the particular, well-mannered restraint of people who had expected something larger and were being gracious about their disappointment. Suzanne had told a friend, at the reception, in a voice slightly louder than she intended, "She seems sweet." Very understated. Lauren had heard it from across the room. She had smiled at Suzanne across the buffet table and thought, understated is just another word for underestimated. She was used to being underestimated. She had decided, a long time ago, to find it useful. The company was called Nexbridge Solutions. Blake had the vision. Genuinely, Claire would always acknowledge that. He had identified a real gap in the supply chain software market, had mapped the competitive landscape with impressive thoroughness, had a product concept that was technically sound and commercially viable. What he didn't have was capital. The banks weren't interested in an unproven founder with a salary history and a business plan, however compelling. Lauren had the capital, not from her salary, though her salary at Meridian had been good and she had saved with the discipline of someone who had grown up understanding that security was built, not given. She had capital because, 9 years into her career, she had made 3 private investment decisions that her colleagues had called cautious at the time and that had returned, collectively, just over $4 million. She had never told Blake the full number. Not from deception. She would examine this later, in the long, honest hours after the receipt, and she would be truthful with herself about it. She hadn't told him because early in their relationship she had sensed something in him that she couldn't fully name but recognized. A way of relating to people that shifted almost imperceptibly depending on what they had. She had wanted to be loved as Lauren first. She had wanted to be sure. She had been sure. She had believed she was sure. So when Blake had come to her, 2 years into their marriage, with his next bridge pitch and his spreadsheets and his energy that made the kitchen feel too small to contain it, she had listened carefully, asked 37 questions over 3 evenings, reviewed the financials herself, and then made a decision. She had invested $1.8 million into NextBridge Solutions as a silent partner, structured through a holding company her attorney had established called Callaway Capital LLC, named quietly after her maiden name, documented thoroughly, filed correctly, and known to precisely 3 people: Lauren, her attorney Sandra Park, and her accountant, who was the son of her father's former colleague and who had inherited Thomas Callaway's particular gift for discretion. Blake knew that NextBridge had received its seed funding from a private investor. He knew the terms: equity stake, board observer rights held by the LLC, standard investor protections. He had never asked who was behind Callaway Capital. He had been so relieved, so energized, so immediately consumed by the business of building his company that the question of who had never pressed itself forward against the momentum of finally. Lauren had meant to tell him. In the first month, she had meant to tell him. Then the company had taken off faster than either of them expected, and telling him had become complicated in the way that delayed truths always become complicated. Not because of the truth itself, but because of the delay, because of what the delay implies. She had kept telling herself there would be a right moment. She had kept not finding it. NextBridge Solutions had grown in 4 years from a 2-person operation in a WeWork space in the West Loop to a 40-person company with offices on the 23rd floor of a building on Wacker Drive and contracts with 3 Fortune 500 companies and a valuation that had most recently been assessed in a Series B funding round 6 months ago at $62 million. Blake Mercer had become, in Chicago business circles, a name, a profile in Crane's Chicago business. A keynote at a supply chain tech conference in Dallas. A man whose confidence, which had always filled rooms, now had rooms built specifically to receive it. And Lauren drove a 4-year-old Honda CR-V and wore cardigans and read financial journals on Saturday mornings at the kitchen table and packed Blake's lunch when he forgot and attended NextBridge company parties as the founder's wife, quiet and pleasant and observant. A woman who knew more about the company's financial architecture than anyone in the building except the CFO, whom she had quietly recommended Blake hire 18 months ago. At the last company party, she had overheard Blake's new VP of sales, a man named Derek who had strong opinions and a loud laugh, tell someone near the bar, "Blake's wife? She's sweet. Schoolteacher type. You know how some guys marry their opposite." Lauren had taken a sip of her sparkling water and thought, Derek's expense reports are consistently 8% over projection, and he rounds up his mileage. She had said nothing. She had smiled at Derek across the room. She was used to being the woman nobody saw. What she had not been prepared for was the possibility that the man she had built everything with had stopped seeing her too. The receipt in her cardigan pocket crinkled slightly when she reached for the salt at dinner. Blake was talking about a client meeting, animated, gesturing, the way he got when a deal was moving. He looked handsome in the kitchen light, his tie loosened, his sleeves rolled, the picture of a man at the height of something. He did not notice the sound of the receipt. He did not notice her eyes. He did not notice, as he had been not noticing for longer than Lauren had allowed herself to admit, the woman sitting across the table from him. Lauren passed him the salt. She watched his hands take it. She thought, how long? And then, because she was her father's daughter and her mother's daughter and 9 years at Meridian Capital's daughter, what do I need to know before I decide what to do? Lauren did not confront Blake that night, or the next night, or the night after that. This was not weakness. Anyone who knew Lauren Callaway Mercer, really knew her, would have recognized it immediately as the opposite. It was the same quality that had made her good at what she did professionally, the capacity to sit with uncomfortable information without reacting to it prematurely, to gather what she needed before she moved, to be certain before she was final. She had learned this at Meridian, in her 3rd year, when a senior partner named Howard Gaines had pulled her aside after a meeting where she'd almost recommended a position based on incomplete data and said, "Lauren, the market rewards patience and punishes impulse. Know everything before you do anything." She had applied it to every investment decision since. She applied it now. What she did, in the 4 days following the receipt, was watch. Not obsessively. She was not a woman who could be consumed by surveillance, who could make suspicion the full-time occupation of her attention. She had a life, a job, a Tuesday evening volunteer shift at the Naperville Public Library where she helped adults with financial literacy, a Thursday morning call with her mother in Rockford, a Friday lunch with her friend Joanna, who taught second grade and made Lauren laugh in the specific, uncomplicated way that only old friends can. But she watched, and she noticed things she realized, carefully not noticing for some time. The way Blake's phone was always face down now. The way he had started taking calls in the garage. The way he had begun going to the gym at 6:30 in the morning when he had never, in 7 years of marriage, been a morning person. The way he looked at her sometimes across the dinner table with a particular quality of not seeing. Not cruelty, not malice, just the vacant, habitual gaze of a man whose attention was somewhere else entirely and had been for long enough that he'd stopped noticing the absence. She noticed all of it. She filed it. She waited. On the 5th day, she called Sandra Park. Sandra Park had been Lauren's attorney for 6 years, a compact, precise woman in her mid-40s who practiced out of a firm in the Loop and who had the quality Lauren valued most in any professional. She asked exactly the right questions and wasted no words on the ones that didn't matter. They met for coffee at a place on Michigan Avenue on a Thursday morning, at a corner table away from the window. Lauren arrived first, ordered an Americano, and had the receipt on the table when Sandra sat down. Sandra read it, set it down, looked at Lauren. "How long do you think?" Sandra asked. "I don't know yet," Lauren said. "I need to know before I make any decisions." "What kind of decisions are we talking about?" "All kinds," Lauren said. "But start with the financial ones." Sandra wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. "You're still the majority investor in Nextbridge through Callaway Capital. 31% equity stake," Lauren said. "Plus the observer rights." "Blake doesn't know it's you." "Blake doesn't know it's me," Lauren confirmed. Sandra was quiet for a moment. Not processing. Sandra was fast. She had processed it the moment Lauren said it. She was simply taking the full measure of the situation before she spoke, which was one of the reasons Lauren trusted her. "You understand," Sandra said carefully, "that the moment this becomes a divorce proceeding, Illinois is an equitable distribution state. The Callaway Capital stake, depending on how it's characterized." "I'm not there yet," Lauren said. "I don't know if I'm going there. I need information first." "What kind of information?" "I need to know who she is," Lauren said. "And I need to know what Blake has told her. About himself. About us. About the company." She paused. "About me." Sandra held her gaze. "Why does that last one matter?" Lauren picked up her Americano. "Because how a man describes his wife to the woman he's betraying her with tells you exactly what kind of man he's become." The woman's name was Kendall Royce. Sandra had a private investigator she trusted, a former Chicago PD detective named Marcus Webb who was thorough and discreet and charged appropriately for both qualities. Within a week, Lauren knew the following. Kendall Royce was 31 years old. She worked in marketing at a tech firm in River North. She was attractive in the polished, curated way of someone who understood personal branding, good clothes, good highlights, a social media presence that was professionally aspirational without being ostentatious. She had been seeing Blake, based on Marcus's findings, for approximately 4 months. She did not appear to know Blake was married. Or rather, and this was the detail that Marcus delivered carefully, watching Lauren's face as he said it, she appeared to believe that Blake was separated, that his marriage was essentially over, that he was in the process of extricating himself from a relationship that had, as he had apparently told Kendall over the Burgundy at Aurelius, run its course. That his wife was a sweet woman, but ultimately not someone who understood his world, not someone who moved at his level. He had apparently used the phrase, and Marcus read it from his notes, because he was thorough. She's a good person, but she's not built for this life. Lauren sat in Marcus's office on a Wednesday afternoon and listened to this and felt the sentence move through her like something cold and chemical. Not devastating, because she had prepared herself for something like this, but clarifying. The way very cold water is clarifying. The way it strips everything back to what is essentially true. Not built for this life. The life she had funded. The company she had capitalized with $1.8 million of her own money. The Series B round she had privately helped structure by making an introduction to a venture firm whose partner she knew from Meridian. The CFO she had recommended. The financial architecture she had helped design from the foundation up, quietly, invisibly, as the woman nobody saw. Not built for this life. She thanked Marcus. She paid his invoice. She walked out onto Wacker Drive and stood in the October wind off the Chicago River and looked at the building where NextBridge Solutions occupied the 23rd floor, and she felt, moving through the cold and the clarity, something she hadn't expected. Not rage. Rage was too hot, too consuming, too likely to make her imprecise. What she felt was resolve. The specific, load-bearing kind. The kind that doesn't announce itself, but simply sets, like concrete, and holds. She was home before Blake that evening. She made dinner, chicken marsala, his favorite, because she was not yet ready to let him see the change in her, and because ordinary life was a useful cover for extraordinary decision-making. Blake came home at 7:15, loosened his tie in the hallway, said the food smelled great, poured himself a glass of bourbon, and sat at the kitchen island scrolling his phone with it face up in the casual way of a man who has deleted everything that needs deleting. He was relaxed. He was comfortable. He was, Lauren observed with the cool precision of someone watching a market she is about to move in, completely unaware that the ground beneath him had changed. "Good day?" she asked, plating the chicken. "Great day," he said. "Closed the Henderson contract. 60-month commitment. Biggest single deal we've ever done." "That's wonderful," Lauren said, and meant it, because the company's success had never been about Blake alone, and she was not the kind of person who confused her feelings about a man with her feelings about a business. "Derek's going to close out the quarter strong," Blake said. "I'm thinking about giving him an equity bump. What do you think?" He asked her this, her opinion on company matters, in the offhand way that people ask questions they don't expect answers to, the rhetorical courtesy of a man who would have been surprised if she'd said anything more substantive than sounds good. Lauren set his plate in front of him. "I think Derek's expense management needs attention before you reward him with equity," she said. "He runs consistently over projection. That pattern doesn't improve with ownership stake. It gets more expensive." Blake looked up at her. Blinked. "How do you know about Derek's expenses?" Lauren sat down across from him. Picked up her fork. "I pay attention," she said simply. Blake looked at her for a moment with the slightly puzzled expression of a man encountering something familiar in an unfamiliar configuration. Then he nodded slowly, said, "Huh," and returned to his food. Lauren ate her dinner. She was ready. Not to explode. She would never explode. She was ready in the way that a precisely placed charge is ready. Calm, contained, and waiting for exactly the right moment. That moment, she had decided, would come. But it would come on her terms. Have you ever known something that changed everything, and had to decide how and when to use it? Tell us in the comments. You're not alone. The NextBridge quarterly board meeting was held on the first Friday of November, in the company's glass-walled conference room on the 23rd floor of the Wacker Drive building, with a view of the Chicago River that Blake had specifically requested when they signed the lease because he believed, genuinely and without irony, that a good view made people think bigger. Lauren had never attended a board meeting. She had never needed to. Her observer rights through Callaway Capital were documented and legally intact, but she had exercised them quietly, through written reports, through Sandra's attendance as her representative, through the quarterly financial summaries that Lauren reviewed at her kitchen table on Saturday mornings in her cardigan while Blake slept in. This Friday, she attended in person. She told Sandra the night before. Sandra had been quiet for exactly 2 seconds and then said, "Do you want me there?" "Yes," Lauren said. "But let me walk in first." She dressed carefully that morning. Not dramatically. Lauren did not do drama in her appearance any more than she did it in her speech. But carefully. The charcoal wool blazer she'd bought 2 years ago and rarely worn. The dark trousers. The simple pearl earrings her mother had given her for her 30th birthday. Her hair, which she usually wore pulled back in the practical manner of a woman with better things to think about, down and simply styled. She assessed in the mirror, like exactly what she was. A serious woman with serious information who had decided it was time to be seen. She drove herself to the city. She parked in the building's garage. She rode the elevator to the 23rd floor. The receptionist, a young woman named Becca who had met Lauren twice at company parties and knew her as Blake's wife, looked up with a professional smile that shifted almost imperceptibly into something uncertain when Lauren said, "I'm here for the board meeting. I'm representing Callaway Capital." Becca looked at her screen, looked back at Lauren. "Of course, Miss Mercer," Lauren said pleasantly. "Lauren Mercer. I'm on the observer list." Blake was already in the conference room when Lauren walked in. He was standing at the head of the table talking to CFO Patrick Huang, the CFO Lauren had quietly recommended 18 months ago, who was meticulous and data-driven and had quietly transformed NextBridge's financial reporting from hopeful to rigorous. Patrick had met Lauren once, briefly, at a charity event, and had formed no particular impression of her beyond Blake's wife. Seemed sharp. Blake looked up when the door opened. The moment his eyes found Lauren standing in the conference room doorway in her charcoal blazer with her leather portfolio under her arm, Lauren watched something happen in his face that she had never seen there before. A sequence of expressions moving through in rapid, uncontrolled succession, like cards being flipped. Recognition. Confusion. A question forming that he didn't know how to ask. And beneath all of it, running like a current under the surface, the first cold touch of something he couldn't yet name. "Lauren," he said. The word came out shorter than he intended. "Good morning," she said. She smiled, warm, composed, the smile of a woman completely at ease in the room she was standing in. "Patrick, good to see you." Patrick looked between them with the careful neutrality of a CFO who understood that something was happening that was above his pay grade and below his desire to be involved. "Good to see you, Lauren." She sat down on the right side of the table, 3 seats from the head, opened her portfolio, and uncapped her pen. The other board members, 2 external directors named Carl Beasley and Yvonne Trask, both of whom knew Callaway Capital as the original seed investor and had interacted with Sandra Park as its representative, entered within the next few minutes. Carl shook Lauren's hand with the uncomplicated professionalism of a man who dealt in equity stakes and didn't particularly care whose name was attached to them. Yvonne, who was sharper and more observant, held Lauren's hand a beat longer and said quietly, "It's good to finally meet you in person." "Long overdue," Lauren said. Blake had not moved from the head of the table. He was standing very still in the way of a man whose body has understood something before his mind has finished processing it. Sandra arrived at 8:58, nodded to Lauren, took the seat beside her, and opened her own portfolio. Blake sat down. The meeting began. Lauren said nothing for the first 40 minutes. She listened. She took notes in her small, precise handwriting, the handwriting of her father's daughter, exact and economical. She watched Patrick walk through the quarterly financials with the attentive focus of someone hearing information she had already reviewed independently and was now verifying against live presentation. The numbers were good. NextBridge was performing. The Henderson contract Blake had celebrated over dinner had pushed Q3 revenue to its highest point in company history. The Series B capital was being deployed efficiently. The product roadmap for the next 18 months was ambitious but defensible. She was proud of it. She allowed herself, quietly, to be proud, not of Blake, not right now, but of the thing itself, the company, the structure, the vision that had been his and the foundation that had been hers, and the 40 people on this floor who had built something real between them. Then Carl Beasley raised the question of the Series C. "We're going to need to think about the next raise," Carl said, leaning back in his chair with the ease of a man who had done this many times. "Probably Q2 next year." "Blake, have you had any preliminary conversations with potential lead investors?" Blake, who had been managing his composure with impressive discipline for 40 minutes, said, "We've had some early conversations. Nothing formal yet. I'm thinking we target the same VC tier we hit for the B round, firms with supply chain portfolio experience. Callaway Capital will be participating in the C round," Lauren said. The table turned to her. All of it. Carl, Yvonne, Patrick, Sandra sitting serenely beside her, and Blake at the head of the table with his hands flat on the surface in front of him. "We've reviewed the company's trajectory," Lauren continued, in the same measured tone she used for everything. The tone that her Meridian colleagues had once described as the voice of someone who has already done the math, and Callaway Capital intends to lead the Series C. We'll be bringing a term sheet to the table in January. Carl looked at Yvonne. Yvonne was looking at Lauren with an expression that had moved from attention to something approaching admiration. Carl cleared his throat. That's significant. Lauren, I wasn't aware you were directly involved in Callaway's investment decisions. I am Callaway Capital, Lauren said simply. I've always been Callaway Capital. The conference room held the sentence. She did not look at Blake. She did not need to. She could feel the quality of his stillness from 3 seats away, the particular, airless stillness of a man in the process of having his entire understanding of his life rearranged. Patrick Huang looked at his CFO's instincts and did quick, visible math behind his eyes, and arrived somewhere that made him set his pen down very carefully. Yvonne Trask looked at Lauren with the direct, unadorned respect of one businesswoman recognizing another across a table, and said, "Well, then we're very glad to have you in the room." "Thank you," Lauren said. "I'm glad to finally be here." Blake caught up with her in the elevator lobby after the meeting. He had excused himself from post-meeting small talk with Carl and Yvonne in a way that probably looked abrupt, probably looked exactly like what it was, a man who needed to get to his wife before she reached the parking garage, and Lauren had let him catch up because this was, she had decided, the conversation that needed to happen today. Not all of it. Not the receipt, not Kendall Royce, not she's not built for this life, not yet. But this part, this first, foundational part. The elevator lobby was empty. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the Chicago River moved below them, gray and steady and indifferent to human crisis. Lauren. His voice was different from any voice she had heard him use before, stripped of the confidence, stripped of the performance, just the raw material of a man who was genuinely, completely off balance. "How long?" "For years," she said. "Since the beginning." He pressed his hand over his mouth, looked at the river, looked back at her. "Why didn't you tell me?" She considered the question honestly, the way she considered everything. "Because I wanted to be loved as Lauren first," she said. "And because I needed to be sure that's what was happening." The words landed in the space between them and stayed there. "And then," she said, her voice still even, still composed, though something beneath it had edges now. "I kept not finding the right moment. And then the moment became something I was afraid of. And then," she stopped, steadied. "And then I found a receipt from Aurelius in your jacket pocket." Blake's face changed completely. All the blood in it seemed to reroute. "Lauren, I'm not doing this here," she said quietly. The elevator arrived. She stepped in. She turned to face him, standing in the lobby with the river behind him and the wreckage of his assumptions visible in every line of his body. "Come home tonight," she said. "We need to talk. All of it. Everything." The doors closed. Lauren rode down alone. In the lobby, she nodded to the security guard, pushed through the revolving door, and stepped out onto Wacker Drive into the November air, which was cold and honest, and smelled like the river and the city and the particular freshness of things that have finally been said. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment. Then she called her mother. "Hey, baby," Diane Callaway said, picking up on the second ring, her voice carrying 31 years of classroom calm and unconditional love. "How are you?" "I'm okay, Mom," Lauren said. And then, because Diane Callaway could hear a hairline fracture in her daughter's voice from 200 miles away. "Actually, I've been better. Can you talk?" "I've got nowhere to be," her mother said. "Talk to me." Lauren walked toward the parking garage. She talked. ACT 3 complete, 1,500 words. Blake was home by 5 o'clock. Lauren heard his car in the driveway from the living room where she was sitting. Not doing anything, not reading, not on her phone, just sitting in the armchair by the window with her hands in her lap, and the last of the November light coming through the curtains in long, thin lines across the floor. She had been sitting there for 20 minutes, not thinking exactly, just settling, getting still in the way she got still before anything that mattered. She heard the car door. She heard his key in the lock. She heard the particular sound of a man entering a house he is not sure how to enter, slower than usual, more deliberate, each sound slightly too careful. Blake appeared in the living room doorway. He had taken off his tie somewhere, in the car, probably. He was holding it in his left hand, loosely, the way you hold something you've forgotten you're holding. He looked like a man who had spent the drive home in the specific, airless silence of someone rehearsing conversations and discarding every version. He looked, Lauren thought, like someone who had been very large for a very long time and had just discovered the room was smaller than he believed. "Sit down, Blake," she said. He sat on the sofa across from her armchair. He set the tie on the cushion beside him. He looked at her with an expression she had not seen on him in years. Open, unguarded, the performance completely gone. Just a man sitting in the honest light of a November afternoon, waiting to be told the truth about himself. Lauren reached into the side table drawer and placed two things on the coffee table between them. The dinner receipt from Aurelius, and a single-page summary, prepared by Sandra, of Callaway Capital LLC's ownership stake in Nextbridge Solutions. Blake looked at both of them for a long time without speaking. "I know about Kendall Royce," Lauren said. Her voice was steady, not cold, not performatively calm, just genuinely steady in the way of a woman who has had 10 days to find her footing and has used every one of them. "I know it's been 4 months. I know what you told her about our marriage. About me." Blake's jaw tightened. He closed his eyes briefly. "Lauren, I'm not finished," she said. Not harshly. Simply. "I know you told her our marriage had run its course. I know you told her I wasn't built for your life." She paused to let that breathe. "I want you to understand that I'm not telling you this to wound you. I'm telling you because we cannot have an honest conversation about our future if we're both pretending I don't know what I know." Blake pressed both hands over his face, held them there. When he lowered them, his eyes were red at the rims. Not crying. Not yet, but close to something that was in the same territory. "She didn't know I was married," he said. "Not fully. I told her we were separated," Lauren said. "I know. That was wrong," he said. "Lauren, I know how wrong that was." "I need you to tell me why," Lauren said. "Not why you cheated. I've been sitting in this chair for 20 minutes, and I think I understand more of the why than I want to. I need you to tell me why you looked at the life we built together, the life I helped you build, and decided it had run its course. Without telling me, without asking me, without even," her voice remained level, but something beneath it pulled tight. "Without even giving me the conversation." Blake was quiet for a long moment. The November light moved through the curtains. Somewhere outside, a car passed on the street. The house held its breath. "I think," Blake said slowly, "that I stopped seeing you." Lauren waited. "Not because you changed," he said. "You didn't change. If anything," he stopped. Looked at the Callaway Capital document on the coffee table. "You were always this. You were always more than I understood. And I think somewhere along the way I told myself a story where I was the one who had grown. The founder, the CEO, the guy with the Whacker Drive office and the Cranes profile. And you were," he stopped again. His voice had dropped. "And you were the background." "The background," Lauren said quietly. "I know." The words came out rough and stripped. "I know how that sounds. I know what it makes me. I'm not asking you to excuse it." "What are you asking?" He looked at her across the coffee table, across the receipt and the document, and 4 years of invisible investment, and 7 years of marriage, and all the accumulated weight of what had been, and what had been lost, and what might still be salvageable if two people were brave enough to try. "I don't know yet," he said honestly. "I don't know if I have the right to ask for anything." Lauren stood up. She walked to the window and stood with her back to him for a moment, looking out at the front yard. The oak tree she had planted the first fall they lived here. Small then, substantial now. The way things become substantial when you tend them over time without needing anyone to acknowledge the tending. "I need to tell you something," she said to the window. "Okay," Blake said quietly. She turned around. "I should have told you about Callaway Capital from the beginning," she said. "I've examined my reasons, and they were not dishonest, but they were incomplete. I told myself I wanted to be loved as Lauren first. That was true. But I also," she pressed her lips together, "I also held it back because some part of me knew that knowing might change how you saw me. And I wanted to be seen without the money. I wanted you to choose me as the woman at the party, not the investor behind the company." She paused. "I understand that my silence made this more complicated than it needed to be. I own that." Blake was staring at her. "Lauren, that's not equivalent to." "I'm not saying it's equivalent," she said. "I'm saying I'm not standing here as someone without fault in the shape of this marriage. I'm saying that we both built walls. Yours were made of something much more destructive than mine, but we both built them." He was quiet. "I'm saying," she continued, "that I'm willing to look at all of it. If you are." "The thing about Kendall," Blake started, and Lauren held up one hand, just slightly. "I need you to end it," she said. Completely, today, and I need to know that you've done it. Not because I'm giving you an ultimatum. Because I cannot have any conversation about what comes next while that exists. It's not possible. It's already done, Blake said. Something in his voice shifted, quieter, more certain than anything else he'd said. I ended it this afternoon. Before I drove home. I should have ended it long before today, and I didn't. And that's, Lauren, there's nothing I can say that makes that okay. But it's done. Lauren studied him. She was good at reading people. 9 years at Meridian, 10 days of watching her husband with clear eyes, and what she read in him now was not performance. It was the particular quality of a man who has hit a wall that was always there and is finally, painfully acquainted with it. I need us to see someone, she said. A counselor. Regularly, not occasionally. I need it to be the most important appointment in both of our weeks. Yes, he said. Immediately. Without negotiation. And I need you to understand something about who I am, she said. Not Callaway Capital. Not the investor. Me, Lauren. The woman who grew up on Rockford on a street where the heat went out in February, and who put herself through U of I, and who spent 9 years building something real before she ever put $1 into your dream. Her voice was still even, but it carried everything now. All of it. The cardigans and the financial journals, and the library volunteer shifts, and the receipt, and the 23rd floor, and the oak tree in the front yard, and the whole, complete, underestimated life of a woman who had been the background of someone else's story for too long. I am not the background, she said. I have never been the background. And I need my husband to know that. Really know it. Not as a fact, as a belief he lives by. Blake Mercer sat on the sofa in the November light with the receipt and the document on the table in front of him and looked at his wife. Really looked at her. The way he hadn't looked at her in longer than he could honestly account for. And what crossed his face in that moment was not guilt alone, though guilt was there. It was recognition. The slow, irreversible recognition of a man seeing something clearly for the first time that had been in front of him the entire time, and understanding, with the full weight of what that means, exactly what his blindness had cost. I know, he said. His voice broke on it. Just slightly, just enough to be real. Lauren, I know. I'm so sorry. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she picked up the Callaway Capital document from the coffee table and held it between them. This was always mine, she said. But I built it because I believed in something we were building together. I still want to believe that. She set the document down. Don't make me stop. The room was very quiet. Outside, the oak tree stood in the last of the November light, patient and rooted and exactly as substantial as 4 years of quiet tending had made it. Has someone ever finally seen you? Really seen you? After a long time of looking past you? Tell us in the comments. Your story matters. ACT 4 complete. 1,550 words. December came to Naperville the way it always did. Slowly at first, then all at once, the way grief comes, the way healing comes, the way most things worth paying attention to come. The oak tree in the front yard lost its last leaves in the first week of the month and stood bare and patient in the yard, its structure fully visible now that there was nothing decorative left to hide behind. Just the essential lines of it, the trunk and the branches and the particular shape of something that had been growing quietly for years. Lauren looked at it every morning from the kitchen window while she made coffee. She found she liked it better this way. Stripped back. Honest. They had started seeing Dr. James Ellison on the second Tuesday of November. Sandra had recommended him. Not as an attorney recommends a service provider, but as a person who had sat in his office herself, years ago, during a difficult chapter, and had found him to be the rare kind of therapist who did not traffic in comfortable reassurances. He was a tall, unhurried man in his early 60s who practiced out of an office in downtown Naperville that smelled like old books and had no clock visible from the patient chairs, which Lauren had decided was either deeply thoughtful or mildly inconvenient, and was probably both. The first session had been the hardest thing Lauren had done in recent memory. Harder than the board meeting, harder than the conversation in the living room, harder in some ways than finding the receipt, because those things had required precision and composure and forward motion, and this required something different. This required her to sit in a room and be unfinished. To not have the answer yet. To let James Ellison ask her a simple question like, what do you need from Blake that you haven't been able to ask for? And to discover, in the silence that followed, that she didn't immediately know. She had always known. She had prided herself on knowing. The not knowing was its own kind of reckoning. Blake had cried in the second session. Not the red-rimmed, almost crying of the living room. Actually cried, in the particular way that men cry when they have held something too long and the holding gives out. He had been talking about his father, Richard Mercer of Winnetka, who had been a successful man and a distant one, who had measured his sons in achievements and found emotional availability to be an irrelevant metric, and James Ellison had asked a question so quiet and precisely placed that Blake hadn't seen it coming. And then Blake was crying and Lauren was sitting beside him, and she had reached over and put her hand over his. Not because everything was healed. Not because the receipt was erased or the 4 months were undone or the words "not built for this life" had stopped living in the back of her mind, where they sometimes surfaced at 2 in the morning with their full, cold weight. But because she recognized the thing being broken open in that room as something real, as the specific sound of a wall coming down. And she was, despite everything, still the woman who had chosen this man on a rooftop in Chicago because he leaned forward when she talked, because he listened, because somewhere inside the confidence and the performance was a person capable of genuine attention. She wanted that person back. She was not certain yet that she would get him, but she was certain she would know, and that was enough to keep moving forward. The conversation with Kendall Royce happened in a way Lauren had not planned for and had not expected to matter as much as it did. It was not a confrontation. Lauren did not do confrontations, did not believe in them as a mechanism for resolution. It happened because Kendall called the house landline on a Thursday evening in late November, apparently unaware that Blake had given her the number months ago in a moment of carelessness, apparently also unaware that Blake had ended things and changed his cell number, and Lauren had answered. There was a pause on the line. Then Kendall's voice, younger than Lauren had imagined, slightly uncertain. Is Blake available? Lauren had stood in the kitchen with the phone and made a decision in approximately 3 seconds. He's not, she said. This is his wife, Lauren. And I think you and I should probably speak for just a moment, if you're willing. Another pause. Longer. Then, oh God. Genuine distress in it. He told me you were, he said. I know what he told you, Lauren said. Not unkindly. Carefully. I don't think you knew the full truth of the situation. And I'm not calling to make this harder for you than it needs to be. A long silence. Then, quietly, I'm so sorry. I wouldn't have, if I had known. I believe you, Lauren said. Because she did. Because Marcus Webb's findings had been clear on that point. And because the voice on the phone was the voice of someone genuinely mortified, genuinely wrong-footed, not calculating. I want you to know that my issue is with my husband, not with you. You were lied to. That's on him, not on you. Kendall was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was smaller. Are you two okay? It was such a human question. Such an unexpected, unguarded question from a woman who had every reason to deflect and had chosen instead to ask something real. We're working on it, Lauren said. That's the honest answer. Okay, Kendall said softly. I really hope it works out. For what that's worth. It's worth something, Lauren said. Take care of yourself. She hung up and stood in the kitchen for a moment. Then she exhaled, a long, slow exhale, the kind that releases something that has been held at tension, and she felt, moving through the release, something she identified after a moment as the specific lightness of having handled something with more grace than it required. Her mother would have approved. Blake found out about the phone call later that evening, when Lauren mentioned it. He sat with it for a long moment. You didn't have to do that, he said. Be kind to her. I know, Lauren said. Why did you? She considered the question, really considered it, the way she considered everything. Because she was lied to, she said. And because I know what it feels like to be in a situation where someone withheld the truth from you, and you had to navigate the consequences of their choices. She looked at him steadily. I didn't want to be the kind of person who punishes someone for another person's dishonesty. Blake was quiet for a long time. I don't deserve you, he said finally. No, she agreed. Not right now. But that's what we're working on. Christmas that year was small and deliberate. They drove to Rockford on Christmas Eve. Lauren's first instinct had been to go to her parents, and Blake had agreed without hesitation, which was itself a small, telling thing. The geography of a man reorienting toward what matters. Thomas Calloway opened the front door in his cardigan and reading glasses with the unhurried warmth of a man who loved his daughter without condition and was perfectly capable of being civil to her husband while holding, quietly, a father's full accounting of recent events. He shook Blake's hand at the door. Blake shook it back. "Good to see you, Tom," Blake said. Thomas looked at him for a moment with the clear, undemonstrative eyes of a man who had spent 30 years doing other people's taxes and knew, better than most, the difference between a number that was real and one that had been managed. "Come in," Thomas said. Diane made pie. Diane Calloway moved through her own kitchen with the ease of a woman entirely at home in her own life, and she greeted Blake with the specific warmth of someone who had chosen, deliberately, to leave a door open, not to pretend, not to minimize, but to leave room for what was possible rather than close around what had happened. After dinner, while Blake and Thomas sat in the living room with decaf and a conversation about small engine repair that Blake was navigating with genuine interest and no expertise, Diane found Lauren in the kitchen drying dishes and stood beside her and said nothing for a companionable moment. Then, "How are you?" Really? Lauren dried a plate. Looked at it. "I'm in progress." "We both are." "Is it real?" Diane asked. "What he's doing?" "The work." Lauren thought about the second therapy session. About Blake crying in a way she had never seen him cry. About the way he had started coming home earlier. Not because she'd asked him to, but because he'd reorganized his own priorities, visibly, in ways that showed up in the details. The phone face up on the table. The garage calls that had stopped. The way he looked at her now when she talked, leaning forward, brow creased, like she was the most important thing in the room. The way he had always looked at her in the beginning. "Yes," she said. "It's real." Diane nodded. Picked up a dish to dry. "Then you're going to be okay." "I think so," Lauren said. "I think we are." On New Year's Eve, they stayed home. No party, no country club event, no performance of celebration. Just the Naperville house and a bottle of good wine that Blake had chosen carefully and Lauren had appreciated the care of, and the television on low, and the comfortable, unguarded quiet of two people who were learning, slowly and imperfectly, and with full awareness of the cost, how to be honest with each other. Just before midnight, Blake set down his glass and looked at her. "I want to tell you something," he said. "And I need you to know it's not. I'm not saying it to manage anything or fix anything. I'm saying it because it's true and I should have been saying it every day for years." Lauren waited. "You are the most remarkable person I have ever known," he said. "Not because of Calloway Capital. Not because of the investment or the board meeting or any of it. Because of who you are in the most ordinary moments. The way you think. The way you move through the world. The way you handled all of this." He stopped. Steadied. "I was so busy performing the life that I stopped living it. And you were living it the whole time, right next to me, and I looked past you. And I will spend the rest of my life making sure you know I see you. If you'll let me." Lauren looked at him across the sofa in the lamplight, at the man she had chosen and who had failed her and who was doing, with real effort and real honesty, the hard and unglamorous work of becoming someone worthy of being chosen again. She picked up her wine glass. "Then see me," she said simply. "That's all I've ever asked." He picked up his glass. Outside, Naperville was moving toward midnight, distant sounds of celebration, the particular electric charge of a year ending and another beginning, the world practicing its ritual of starting over. The clock turned. Blake leaned over and kissed her, gently, without performance, the way you kiss someone when you mean it as a promise rather than a gesture. Lauren kissed him back. In January, Calloway Capital filed its term sheet for the Nextbridge Series C. Lauren signed it herself, in Sandra's office on a Tuesday morning, with her good pen and her steady hand, and her name written fully and clearly at the bottom of the page. Not hidden, not filtered through a holding company's anonymity, but present. Lauren and Mercer. Sole principal, Calloway Capital LLC. Sandra witnessed it and handed the document back and said, "You know the board is going to want you in the room from now on." "Good," Lauren said. She capped her pen. "I should have been in the room from the beginning." At the first board meeting of the new year, Blake introduced her, not as his wife, not as the investor, but by her full name and her full role, standing at the head of the table with his hand briefly at the small of her back before he stepped aside and gave her the floor. Lauren stood at the head of the table in the glass-walled conference room on the 23rd floor, with the Chicago River moving below and the January sky hard and clear and blue above the city, and she looked at the faces around the table. Carl, Yvonne, Patrick, the new faces of the Series C process already beginning, and she felt the room the way she felt every room she walked into, as a system of forces, load-bearing and dynamic, always capable of being understood if you were patient enough to study it. "Thank you," she said. "Let's talk about where we're going." On a Saturday morning in February, Lauren was at the kitchen table with her financial journal and her coffee and the particular Saturday morning quiet she had always loved, when Blake came downstairs, poured himself a cup, and sat across from her. He didn't have his phone. He didn't have anything. He just sat down with his coffee and looked at her with the open, forward-leaning attention that had made her choose him on a rooftop in Chicago all those years ago. "What are you reading?" he asked. She turned the journal so he could see. He leaned forward. His brow creased. He asked a question, a real question, an interested question, the kind that requires you to actually look at what someone is doing instead of past it. Lauren answered. He listened. Outside, the February light was thin and pale and honest, the kind of light that shows everything as it actually is, and the oak tree in the front yard stood in it without apology, bare still, but alive, its roots deep and its structure sound, already preparing, in the invisible way that rooted things do, for spring. She was never the background. She was always the foundation. And the most powerful thing she did wasn't revealing the deed or walking into that boardroom. It was choosing, with full knowledge and open eyes, to build again. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that being underestimated is not the same as being less, that quiet strength is still strength, that love worth keeping is worth fighting for, tell us in the comments below. We read every single one. And if you haven't subscribed yet, join this family, because there are more stories like this one waiting for you. Thank you so much for watching my story all the way to the end. Your support means everything. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts.